You build a castle, stone by stone, for 50 years. You build it not for yourself, but for them. For your legacy. You imagine your grandchildren, their children, running through its halls, their laughter echoing off the walls you built with your own two bleeding hands. But I was a fool. A sentimental old fool. The castle wasn't a home to them. It was a vault. And I was just the old man who happened to know the combination. I remember the day the scales fell from my eyes. It wasn't a dramatic shouting match, not at first. It was quieter than that, more insidious. It was a Tuesday. The sun was too bright outside my office window. My son, Michael, my firstborn, was sitting across from me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He was talking about his latest venture, a sure thing in commercial real estate. "Dad," he said, leaning forward, his voice slick as oil. "This is the one. It's a gold mine. But we need capital. A significant injection. The banks are being difficult." I felt a familiar ache in my chest. This was the fourth sure thing in as many years. "Michael, we've discussed this. Your fundamentals are weak. Your business plan reads like a wish list, not a strategy." His smile tightened. "My strategy is fine. My problem is my investors lack vision. They don't see the bigger picture." He paused, letting the silence hang between us. "You could see it, though. You've always had the vision. Alone, Dad, just to get us over this hump. You'll get every penny back, with considerable interest." I shook my head, the weight of every previous failed sure thing pressing down on me. "No, Michael, not this time. You need to stand on your own. Build something real, like I did." The mask slipped then. The pleasantry evaporated, and what was left was cold and hard. His eyes, my own eyes reflected back at me, turned flat and greedy. "Stand on my own," he said, the words a low sneer. "With what? The pittance you've allowed us to have. You sit in this office, on a throne of money you'll never spend, and you lecture me about building. We're your children. It's our money. It's my inheritance. You're just hoarding it." The word inheritance hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't about building something. It was about waiting for me to die. I felt my hands, resting on the polished mahogany of my desk, start to tremble, not with age, but with a cold, building fury. I had to clench them into fists to make it stop. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Fine. But remember this conversation, Dad. When you're alone in this big, empty house of yours, remember that you had a family who wanted to build with you, and you chose your money instead." He left, and I sat there for a long time, watching the sunlight crawl across the room. The ache in my chest wasn't sadness anymore. It was something else, something darker. That night, at the weekly family dinner I still foolishly insisted upon, the air was thick with silence. My daughter, Sarah, who ran a floundering boutique tech firm, kept shooting looks at her brother. Finally, she couldn't hold it in. "Michael told me you turned him down," she said, her voice sharp, accusatory. She wasn't talking to her father. She was talking to the bank manager who had just denied her application. "Do you have any idea what that kind of capital could have done for him? For all of us? The synergies alone synergies?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your company hasn't turned a profit in 3 years, Sarah. What exactly are you synergizing? Debt?" Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You are so out of touch. The market is evolving, and we are positioned perfectly to capitalize on the next wave. We just need the resources to get there. Your position is at the bottom of a river, and you're holding anchor, Sarah," I said, my patience wearing thinner than old silk. It was my son-in-law, David, a man with the ambition of a shark and the moral compass of a Weather Vane, who plunged the knife in. He smiled, a thin, bloodless thing. Now, let's not fight. Arthur, we all just be worrying about you. All the stress, managing such a vast portfolio at your age. We want to help. Perhaps it's time to start discussing a more formal transition, putting things in order. For the sake of the family." I looked around the table, at Michael, avoiding my gaze, at Sarah, fuming, at David, smiling his reptilian smile, at their spouses and my other children, all silent, complicit in their silence. They weren't my family. They were a committee. A board of directors waiting to vote me out. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a glacial calm settling over the white-hot anger. A transition, I asked, my voice deceptively mild. Yes, David pressed, sensing weakness. We could take on more responsibility, sit on the boards of your companies. We could learn from you, of course, but it would ease your burden, and it would ensure that everything remains in the family. Remains in the family. The phrase echoed in the silent, expensive room. I looked at each of their faces, and I didn't see my children. I saw claimants. I saw impatience. I saw greed, naked and unashamed. I slowly wiped my mouth with my napkin and placed it neatly on the table. I have spent my entire life building my burden, I said, each word measured and cold, and I am not yet ready to be relieved of it. The discussion is over. I left them there, sitting at the table, surrounded by the opulence my life's work had provided. The silence behind me was no longer just angry, it was shocked. I had never been so blunt, so final. As I climbed the stairs to my study, I heard the eruption begin. Muffled, furious voices from behind the dining room door. It was the sound of my family, but it felt like the sound of enemies plotting a siege, and that's when the first, faint idea began to whisper in the back of my mind. A dark, terrible, beautiful idea. They saw my wealth as a static thing, a pile of gold to be divided. They didn't understand it was a living, breathing engine. It grew, it adapted, it consumed, it could consume them, too. I just didn't know how. Not yet. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend and financial advisor, Benjamin Croft. His voice was warm over the phone, a relic from a time when loyalty wasn't just a word. Arthur, to what do I owe the pleasure? Ready to finally retire and buy that island? Not quite. Ben, I said, my voice tight. I need you to do something for me. Something discreet. Anything. You know that. I took a deep breath. I want a deep dive. Forensic. On Michael's real estate group, and on Sarah's tech firm, Nebula Systems. I want to know everything. Their debt structure, their investors, their creditors, their assets. I want to know which banks are holding their paper and who's sniffing around for a fire sale. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Ben knew my children, had been to their christenings. Arthur, may I ask why? Let's just say I'm considering investing, I said. The lie smooth and easy. I need to understand the full risk profile. He agreed, though his tone was laced with concern. The reports arrived a week later, to thick, bound dossiers. I poured a scotch, old and peaty, and opened the one on Michael's company first. It was worse than he'd imagined. Much worse. He was leveraged to the hilt. Loans upon loans, each one more desperate than the last. He had overpaid for properties just as the market was softening. His creditors were a rogues gallery of aggressive investment firms, the kind that specialized in dismantling companies and selling them for parts. Then I opened Sarah's file. Nebula Systems. It was a ghost ship, a beautiful idea with no viable product, burning through cash on lavish offices and the bloated payroll. Her lead investor was a venture capital group called Apex Vortex. I knew that name. They were vultures. They'd force a company to grow at an unsustainable rate, then pull their funding at the first sign of trouble, leaving the carcass for the lawyers. I felt a profound, soul-crushing sadness. This was my legacy. This staggering incompetence. This sheer, unadulterated greed. I had given them every advantage, the best education, a safety net thicker than most people's dreams, and they had used it to build houses of cards. I was about to close the file, my heart a lead weight in my chest, when a single line item in the creditor list for Michael's company caught my eye. It was a name I knew intimately. It was one of my companies, a quiet, unglamorous little firm I owned called Stonehaven Capital. It specialized in commercial debt acquisition. It bought it decades ago as a stable, boring investment. It'd largely forgotten it was there, letting its managers run it autonomously. According to the report, Stonehaven held a secondary lien on Michael's largest property, a half-empty office building head bought at the peak of the market. My own company was one of the wolves circling my son. The irony was so brutal, so perfect. It stole the breath from my lungs. I sat back in my leather chair, the glass of scotch forgotten in my hand. The whisper in the back of my mind became a clear, cold voice. They want your money, it said. Then let them make you richer. The plan didn't form fully in that moment. It unfolded. Like a terrible, beautiful flower blooming in the dark. It wasn't enough to just say no. That was a defensive move. I needed to go on the offensive. I needed to turn their own failure, their own greed, into my weapon. I called Ben back. His hello was cautious. Then, I said, my voice now utterly calm. The calm after the storm has passed and left nothing but wreckage. I want you to listen very carefully. I have a new investment strategy. I'm all ears, Arthur. I want you to identify every single creditor, every investment firm, every bank that has significant exposure to Michael's and Sarah's companies, everyone that's holding their debt. I want a list. Okay, Ben said, slowly, confused. But Arthur, those are toxic assets. Those firms are facing significant losses. Why would you want to? I don't want to buy the debt, Ben, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I want to buy them. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear his brain trying to process the sheer, audacious scale of it. You want to acquire the creditors? He finally stammered. Not all of them. Not immediately. Start with the most vulnerable. The ones who are over-leveraged themselves. Start with Apex Vortex, Sarah's VC. I want to own them. Then we move to the others. We do it quietly, through shells, through holding companies. I want no connection to me until I decide it's time. Arthur, for God's sake, why? Ben's voice was a mix of horror and awe. This is a monumental undertaking. The capital required is not an issue. I stated flatly. This is no longer about capital, Ben. This is about justice. Justice, he echoed, bewildered. They think my wealth is their inheritance, I said. The words I scold and precise. I'm going to show them that their failure is mine. I ended the call and looked out at the city skyline. My city. The one I had helped build. The gears of commerce turned down below, ruthless and uncaring. I had spent a lifetime playing that game and winning. My children had forgotten that. They thought the old lion had lost his teeth. They thought the castle was undefended. They were wrong. The first acquisition was Apex Vortex. It took 3 months and a sum of money that would have made a sultan blush. But money was a tool, and I wielded it like a scalpel. We met resistance, of course, but everything has a price, especially a failing venture capital firm that had bet wrong on one-to-many sure things. I remember the day the deal was finalized. Ben called me, his voice shell-shocked. It's done, Arthur. You own Apex Vortex. The papers are signed. I felt a thrill that was entirely new to me. It wasn't joy. It was power. Pure and absolute. Good, I said. Now, instruct the new my management to call the note on Nebula Systems. Immediately. Demand full repayment of all outstanding capital. Ben gasped. Arthur. That will force them into bankruptcy. They can't possibly pay. That's your daughter's company. I am aware of whose company it is, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Execute the instruction. The call was made. The demand was sent. The clock started ticking. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang 2 hours later. It was Sarah. Her voice was hysterical. Tears and rage competing for dominance. Dad, something terrible has happened. It's Apex. Those bastards. Those absolute bastards. They've called the note. They want all of it. Now. They can't do this. We had an understanding. I leaned back in my chair. The receiver call against my ear. An understanding, Sarah. In business, there are contracts. There are covenants. There are no understandings. But Dad, you don't get it. This will destroy me. Nebula will be finished. After all you've built, you have to help me. You have to talk to them. You know people. Make them see reason. I let her panic hang in the air for a moment. Let her truly feel the abyss opening beneath her feet. Who exactly would you like me to talk to? Sarah, I asked, my tone perfectly neutral. The partners at Apex. Anyone. Tell them you'll guarantee the debt. Tell them they'll get their money. They just need to be patient. I could almost see her, clutching her phone, her perfect world shattering around her. The emotion I felt was not pity. It was curiosity, a clinical interest in how she would break. I'm afraid I can't do that, Sarah, I said, my voice soft but firm. You told me I was out of touch, that I didn't understand the new market. You insisted you were positioned perfectly. You need to stand on your own, build something real. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a choked, sputtering silence. The words I had spoken to Michael, now thrown back at his sister. She heard the echo. She heard the coldness. What are you saying? She whispered, the rage gone, replaced by a dawning, terrible confusion. I'm saying you need to solve your own problems, Sarah, I said. I'm no longer your safety net. I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady. I expected to feel a pang of guilt, a father's regret. I felt nothing but the cold, satisfying click of a perfectly laid trap springing shut. Nebula Systems filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection the following week. The news was a small blip in the business section. I read the article with a detached interest. The fire sale of its assets was swift. The patents, the office equipment, the client list all went to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder, through a newly acquired subsidiary of a shell company owned by a trust that I controlled, was me. I bought the shattered pieces of my daughter's dream for pennies on the dollar. A month later, as the 4 lease signs were going up in the windows of our empty offices, I received a visit. It was Michael. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up at my home, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in him before. He didn't even say hello. It's you, he breathed, standing in the doorway of my study, not waiting for an invitation to enter. My God, it's you. I looked up from my book, feigning mild annoyance. Michael, to what do I owe this dramatic entrance? Stonehaven Capital, he said, the words tumbling out of him. They've been bought. The new owners they're calling my loans. All of them. They're not even negotiating. They just want out. They're forcing me into default. I closed my book slowly, marking my page with a finger. That is unfortunate. The commercial real estate market is quite soft right now. Unfortunate. He laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. It's a death sentence. And that's not all. 2 other creditors did the same thing this week. It's like they're coordinating. And then I remembered Sarah. Apex Vortex, out of the blue. And I started digging. Dad, I dug. He stared at me, his eyes searching my face for any flicker of emotion, any sign of denial. I gave him nothing. The group that bought Apex, it's a shell. But it traces back. It always traces back. The group that bought my other creditors, it's the same pattern. It's you. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. You're doing this. You're systematically destroying us. I held his gaze, letting the silence confirm everything. The mask was off. The game was revealed. Why? He begged, his voice breaking. For God's sake, why? We're your family. I finally stood up, walking around my desk to stand before him. I looked at my son, a man in his 40s, crumbling before me. You are my children, I said, my voice low and steady, each word a hammer blow. And you looked at me and saw a bank. You looked at my life's work and saw an obstacle. You sat at my table and talked about my death as a liquidity event. I took a step closer. He actually flinched. You wanted my money. You are making me money. Every dollar you lose, I profit. Every failure of yours, I capitalize on. Your greed, your incompetence, your betrayal, it's the best investment I've ever made. The color drained completely from his face. He looked like he'd been shot. He staggered back a step, shaking his head, unable to process the sheer, monstrous truth of it. You're a monster, he breathed. No, I corrected him softly. I am your father, and this is your inheritance. He turned and fled, stumbling out of my study, out of my house. I listened to the door slam shut, the sound echoing through the vast, empty halls of my castle. I was alone again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of victory. That victory, I was about to learn is never final. Because while I had been focused on my children, I had forgotten about their spouses. I had forgotten about David. And David, it turned, was not a man who would go quietly into the night. He was a scavenger, and had just caught the scent of a much, much larger carcass than had ever dreamed of. He wasn't just going to run away. He was going to fight back. And he was going to start by digging up a secret I thought he'd buried decades ago, a secret that could unravel everything. You ever feel the ground shift under your feet? Not in an earthquake way. No, this is quieter, more intimate. It's the feeling of a floorboard you've walked on your whole life, suddenly giving way. You don't fall through, not yet. You just feel that sickening lurch, that whisper of emptiness below. I felt that lurch the day Michael ran out of my study. I had won. I had laid them low. My son and my daughter were financially ruined by my own hand, and their failure had padded my coffers beyond even my own expectations. The karmic investment was paying dividends I could never have dreamed of. I should have felt invincible, but I didn't. I felt watched. It was David, my son-in-law, the shark, while Michael and Sarah were licking their wounds, screaming their betrayal to anyone who would listen, which, thankfully for me, was mostly each other. David went quiet, sinfully quiet. He wasn't at the next family dinner. Sarah came alone, her face a mask of bitter resentment, but she said nothing. She just picked at her food and left before dessert. Michael didn't show at all, but David's absence was louder than any tantrum. A man like David doesn't just surrender. He regroups, he calculates, and he looks for leverage. I found out what he'd been doing about 3 weeks later. Benjamin Croft came to see me in person. He didn't call ahead. He just appeared in my doorway, his face ashen, a leather folder clutched in his hand like it was contaminated. "Arthur," he said, and his voice had a tremor I'd never heard before. "We need to talk. Now." I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Ben, you look like you've seen a ghost." "I might have," he said, sinking into the chair. He didn't open the folder. He just stared at it. "There's been activity. Inquiries. Inquiries are a part of business, Ben," I said, though a cold finger traced its way down my spine. "Not these." He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading, scared. "Someone is digging, Arthur, deep. They're not looking at your current holdings. They're going back, decades. They're pulling corporate records from the 70s and 80s. They're following paper trails that were meant to stay buried." The cold finger became an icy grip around my heart, but my face remained a placid mask. "What, precisely, are they looking for, Ben?" He swallowed hard. "They're looking for the origin of your initial capital, the first million, the seed money for everything." He tapped the folder. "They're asking about a partnership, a silent partner, from your first venture, Kane and another name." I didn't need him to say it. The name echoed in the silent, panelled room. If he'd shouted it. Kane and Risha. Thomas Risha, my partner, my brother in all but blood. The man whose name I had sworn I would never hear spoken again. The man I had erased. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't stop it. This was the foundation, the one stone I could not let anyone dislodge. "Who?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "Who is asking?" Ben looked down at the folder again, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's a law firm. A very good, very expensive, very discreet one. But I have a contact there." After some persuasion, he gave me a name, the client who retained them. He looked up, and the name he said was the one I already knew, the only one it could be. "David," I whispered. Ben nodded. "He's not just digging, Arthur. He's excavating, and he's getting close. He's found the corporate filings for Kane and Risha Import, Export. He's found the old business licenses. He's asking what happened to Thomas Risha. He's asking why the partnership was dissolved so abruptly in 1978. He's asking where Mr. Risha's share of the assets went." The room felt like it was tilting. 1978. A lifetime ago. A different man. A hot-headed, ambitious, desperate young man who saw a golden opportunity and took it. Consequences be damned. I had built my castle on that opportunity. I had built my entire life on it. And David, that bloodless, ambitious parasite, had somehow found the fault line. "What have you told them?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Nothing," Ben insisted, his hands up. "The official records are sealed. The dissolution was handled by my predecessor, and he was thorough. On paper, Thomas Risher sold his share to you for a lump sum and moved overseas. There's a trail, a false one, but it's held for 40 years. But," I prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, "but paper is one thing, Arthur. People are another." David's lawyers aren't just looking at paper. They're looking for people. They're asking about secretaries, accountants, warehouse foremen from 1978. Most of them are dead or senile. But not all. He opened the folder finally and slid a single photograph across the desk. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed an old man, bent and frail, sitting on the porch of a modest house in a sun-baked state. Arizona, maybe. New Mexico. He was squinting into the sun, a blanket over his knees. I knew him instantly. The hair was white, the face a road map of wrinkles, but the eyes were the same. Albert Schmidt, my old warehouse foreman. A good man, a loyal man, had been there that night. He knew everything. "They found him," Ben said, his voice hollow. "David's people found old Schmidt." I felt a roaring in my ears. The past wasn't just whispering anymore, it was screaming back to life. Thomas Risher hadn't just sold his share, had been forced out. We'd had a disagreement, a violent, terrible disagreement over a shipment that wasn't on any manifest, over money that wasn't on any ledger. It was the first and only time he'd ever let ambition completely override my conscience. It made a choice. It'd chosen the business. It'd chosen the future. It'd chosen myself. And Thomas had chosen to disappear, with a substantial cash payment and the unspoken threat of ruin or worse if he ever spoke of it again. It told myself it was a business decision, a hard one, but necessary. It buried it so deep it almost convinced myself it had happened differently. But old Schmidt knew the truth, had helped me load the boxes that night, had seen the look on Thomas' face, had taken a payment of his own, and a one-way ticket to anywhere else. And now David was knocking on his door. "What does David want?" I asked, though I already knew. This wasn't about history for its own sake. For a man like David, history was just a currency. "He hasn't made a move yet," Ben said. "This is all reconnaissance. He's arming himself. He's not doing this for Sarah. He's doing this for himself. He's building a weapon, Arthur. And if he finds what I think he's looking for, it's not just a scandal. It's fraud. It could be worse, depending on what exactly happened that night." We sat in silence for a long moment, the ghost of Thomas Risher between us. "What do you want to do?" Ben finally asked. The old fury, the cold, calculating anger that had fueled my revenge against my children, resurfaced. But it was different now. It was sharper, more desperate. This wasn't about teaching a lesson anymore. This was about survival. "Two things," I said, my mind clicking into a cold, focused rhythm. "First, you get to old Schmidt. Today, you offer him more money than David could ever dream of offering him. You move him. You hide him. You make him disappear again. Permanently. And if he doesn't want to go," Ben asked, fear in his eyes. "Everyone has a price, Ben. You find his. You remind him of his loyalty to me. You remind him of the alternative. Be persuasive." Ben nodded slowly. "And the second thing," I looked out the window, at the city I had built my empire upon. "I need to see David. It's time we had a conversation." Getting David alone was easier than I expected. He was eager for it. He thought he was about to win. I invited him to my club, a place of old wood and older money, where conversations were hushed and privacy was absolute. We sat in a secluded corner of the library, 2 glasses of bourbon between us, untouched. He was smirking, a smug, triumphant little curl of his lip. He thought he held all the cards. "Arthur," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I have to admit, I didn't expect your invitation. I thought you'd be busy counting your profits from my wife's bankruptcy." I ignored the bait. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the silence stretch until his smirk began to waver. I understand you've taken an interest in history, David, I said, my voice calm. His eyes flickered with surprise, then settled into a hard gleam. So, he knew I knew. Good. It saved time. It's a fascinating period, he said smoothly. The Wild West of business. Before all these pesky regulations, a man could really make a name for himself, or have one made for him. Some names are best left in the past, I said. Some are, he agreed, and some are worth revisiting, especially when they seem to have been mislaid. Thomas Risher, for example, your partner, your equal, according to the original articles of incorporation. It's strange, isn't it? How a man who built half of this empire just vanished without a trace. No family, no friends coming forward, just poof. He made a gesture with his hand. Gone. I said nothing. I just watched him. His smile widened. He was enjoying this. It makes a man wonder. What happened? Did he get a raw deal? Was he pressured to sell? Was there violence? The world was a rougher place back then. Accidents happened. What do you want, David? I asked, my voice flat, cutting through his theatrics. The smile vanished, replaced by a cold, avaricious hunger. I want what's fair. Sarah's devastated. Her life's work destroyed. By her own father. It's unconscionable. I want it made right. How? I want her company back, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. All of it. The patents, the assets, the name. I want it out of your holding companies and back in her hands. And I want the capital to restart it. A significant grant. No strings. I almost laughed. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it. And in return, he said, leaning forward, the historical research stops. The questions about Thomas Risher go away. The past stays buried. You can keep your pristine reputation. Everyone wins. I swirled the bourbon in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. And if I refuse? His face hardened. Then I continue my research. I find Mr. Schmidt. I find others. I piece together what really happened in 1978. And I take that story to the press. I take it to the authorities. I take it to every single one of your business partners. I will burn your entire legacy to the ground, Arthur. I will make sure the world knows the first dollar of the Kane fortune was stained with betrayal. You won't just be a rich old man. You'll be a monster. He sat back, satisfied. He had delivered his ultimatum. He thought he had me cornered. I set my glass down with a quiet, precise click. I looked at him. This upstart. This scavenger who thought he could blackmail me with my own past. David, I said, my voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear it. You are a fool. His confidence faltered for a second. What? You think you understand power? I continued, my words dripping with contempt. You think it's about leverage, about secrets. You found a loose thread, and you think you can unravel me. I can, he spat, his composure cracking. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You can't, because you made one critical mistake. And what's that? He sneered. You came after me, I said, my eyes locking onto his. You should have stayed in the shadows. You should have been happy with the crumbs you were stealing. But you got greedy. You looked into the darkness. And now the darkness is going to look back. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes then. Good. What are you going to do? He challenged, trying to sound brave. I am going to give you nothing, I said, my voice cold and absolute. Not a single cent. Not a single asset. You will drop this investigation. You will never speak the name Risher again. You will go back to your mediocre life. And you will be grateful that I allow you to breathe the same air as me. He laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Or what? You'll bankrupt me too. I have nothing you can take, Arthur. I'm not like your children. I'm not over-leveraged. I'm careful. Everyone has something to lose, David, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. You're careful with money, but you're reckless with other things. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a single photograph. It wasn't of old Schmidt. It was of him, David, leaving a discreet hotel in the middle of the afternoon. Not alone. The woman with him was not my daughter. I slid it across the table. His face went as white as the linen tablecloth. He stared at the photo, his hands trembling. Where did you get this? I told you, I said, my voice soft as falling snow. The darkness looks back. Did you really think I wouldn't have you watched? After what you did to my children, I know about her. I know about the apartment you rent under a false name. I know about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands, where you've been stashing the money you've been embezzling from Sarah's company for the last 3 years. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The predator had become prey. Sarah doesn't know about any of that, does she? I mused. She thinks her company failed because of market conditions, because of my cruelty. She doesn't know her own husband was bleeding it dry the whole time. I wonder how she'd react. I wonder what would be left of you after she was done. You can't, he stammered. I can, I said, picking up the photograph and tucking it back into my pocket. I own that hotel, David. The desk clerk works for me. The private investigator who took this photo works for me. The bank manager in Georgetown, he owes me a rather significant favor. Your entire life is surrounded by people who are loyal to me, and you never even knew it. I stood up, looking down at him as he sat there, shattered, exposed, a pathetic shell of a man. So here is my counteroffer. You go home. You tell your lawyers to stand down. You never speak of this again. And in return, I won't show this photograph to my daughter. I won't have you arrested for embezzlement. I will allow you to continue your sad, little life. I leaned down, my face close to his. But know this, if I ever hear so much as a whisper of Thomas Risher's name from anyone, anywhere, I will not ruin you. I will erase you. Do you understand? He could only nod, his eyes wide with terror. I left him there, sitting in the quiet library, surrounded by the histories of great men. He was not one of them. I walked out into the cool evening air, feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. I had won again. I had protected my secret. I had stopped David cold, but as I slid into the back of my car, the victory felt hollow. The cost was escalating. First, I had to become a monster to my children. Now, I had to become a blackmailer to protect myself from my own son-in-law. I was adding new floors to my castle, but they were built on darker and darker foundations, and a thought, cold and insidious, crept into my mind. I had stopped David, but I hadn't found old Schmidt yet. What if David had already gotten to him? What if, even now, that old man was telling his story to a tape recorder, his words waiting to be unleashed? The ground hadn't just lurched, it was still moving, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I had to find Albert Schmidt. I had to silence him for good. But as my car pulled away from the curb, a darker, more terrifying question began to form. What if I was already too late? The silence after a battle is the loudest sound in the world. It's not peace. It's the echo of what you've done. It's the space for the ghosts to come out and dance. I had David's silence. It broken him in that library, shown him that the monster he was trying to unmask was already living in his own house, wearing his own face. The calls to the lawyers stopped. The digging ceased. He walked around my daughter like a ghost himself, flinching every time the phone rang. I had won, but the other silence, the one from the desert, that was the one that was screaming at me. Weeks turned into a month. Benjamin Croft was a ghost himself, a nervous, pale wraith reporting to me daily. Had been to Arizona, had found the house. It was empty. A for sale sign staked into the brittle front lawn. The neighbors said old Schmidt had a visit from a well-dressed man one afternoon, packed a single suitcase that evening, and was gone by morning. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. David swore, on everything he claimed to hold holy, that it wasn't him, that his people had never made contact. He was too terrified of me to lie. So who was the well-dressed man? The question became a splinter in my mind, festering, poisoning every victory. I had built an empire on knowing everything, controlling everything. And now, there was a single, simple, terrifying unknown. Where was Albert Schmidt? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Every ring of the doorbell, every call from an unknown number, every piece of mail, my heart would hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was this it? Was this the moment the past finally kicked the door down? I started sleeping less. The walls of my castle, which had once felt like a fortress, began to feel like a cage. A very expensive, very gilded cage, where I was the only occupant, waiting for the executioner. The revenge I had so meticulously planned, the karmic investment that was paying off beyond my wildest dreams, it all turned to ash in my mouth. What good was all the money in the world if it couldn't buy me a single night's peace? I was drowning in my victory, and the worst part was, I had no one to blame but myself. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of grey, damp day that seeps into your bones. When the call finally came, it wasn't on my private line. It was on the house phone, the one listed in the directory. My housekeeper, Maria, answered it. "Mr. Kane," she said, peering into my study, her face puzzled. "It's for you, a gentleman. He says it's about a mutual friend. Albert." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the room sway. I nodded, too numb to speak, and pointed for her to put the call through to my desk. The phone on my blotter rang, a shrill, demanding sound in the silent room. I picked it up. "Kane," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. "Arthur Kane," a voice said. It was an older voice, calm, educated, with a faint, unplaceable accent. It was not a voice I recognized. "My name is Charles Risher." Risher. The name was a key turning in a lock it sealed shut half a century ago. The air left my lungs. I couldn't speak. I could only listen, my knuckles white on the receiver. "I believe you knew my father." The voice continued, smooth as polished stone. "Thomas Risher." I found my voice, a dry croak. "I don't know what you're talking about." A soft, humorless laugh on the other end of the line. "Please, Arthur. May I call you Arthur? Let's not waste time with denials. We are both men of business. The paperwork, while old, is quite clear. The testimonies are compelling." "Testimonies," I managed to say. The word testimonies meant more than one. He hadn't just found Schmidt, had found others. "Albert Schmidt was most helpful," Charles Risher said, as if reading my mind. "Once we assured him of his safety and provided adequate compensation for his loyalty. He filled in many of the blanks, as did others. A secretary who remembered typing up documents she wasn't supposed to see. A dock worker who was paid to look the other way. The past isn't dead, Arthur. It's just waiting for the right person to ask about it." The walls were closing in. The carefully constructed narrative of my life was crumbling around me. "What do you want?" I asked, the question a surrender. "What is owed?" he said simply. "My father died a bitter, broken man in a rented room in Buenos Aires. He told me stories, you know, about his brilliant partner, his friend, the man who betrayed him for a shipping container full of electronics, and a life insurance policy he was forced to take out. He said you shook his hand, promised him it was just business, and then you ruined him. You took his name, his reputation, his share of the company. You left him with nothing but a suitcase of cash and a threat." "It was a business arrangement," I whispered, the old, feeble defense sounding pathetic even to me. "It was theft," Charles Risher corrected, his voice hardening. "It was fraud, and it was, I believe, actionable then, and most certainly actionable now. The statute of limitations on fraud is quite long when it's been so cleverly concealed." I felt ancient. Every one of my 80-odd years settled on me at once. The weight of it pressed me down into my chair. "You want money?" Another soft laugh. "I am a professor of history. Arthur, I have little need for obscene wealth. But my children, my grandchildren, they deserve what was stolen from their bloodline. They deserve their inheritance. Name your price," I said, the words tasting like gall. "I'm not here to negotiate a settlement," he said, and the calm in his voice was more terrifying than any shout. "I am here to execute my father's will. A true will, not the forged one you had filed with the courts. I want it all, Arthur. I want my father's 51% share of Kane Holdings. I want his name restored on the founding documents. I want his portrait hanging in your lobby. I want the world to know that the House of Kane was built, from its very foundation, by a Risher." The demand was so vast, so audacious, it was almost laughable. It wasn't a shakedown. It was an annihilation. You're insane, I breathed. He'll fight you, or bury you in lawyers, until your grandchildren are old and grey. I'm sure you will try, he said, utterly unperturbed. But while you're doing that, I will be speaking to the SEC. I will be speaking to the IRS. I will be providing every newspaper I can find with copies of the documents I have. I will not just sue you, Arthur. I will tell the story. I will carve your name into history, but not as a titan, as a thief, a betrayer. Is that the legacy you want? To have everything you built, everything you think you protected from your greedy children, exposed as a lie? He had me. He knew it. I had built my entire life, my entire revenge, on the foundation of my name, my wealth, my power. He was threatening to take the one thing I had left, my story. I need time, I said. The words a defeated sigh. You have 72 hours, Charles Risher said. I will be in touch. The line went dead. I sat there 4 hours, as the grey afternoon turned into a black night. The rain tapped against the window panes like accusing fingers. I had never felt so alone. My children were my enemies. My past was a predator at the gate, and my future was a 72-hour clock counting down to my utter ruin. The karmic investment. The phrase echoed in my hollowed-out mind. I had thought I was so clever, profiting from my children's failures. But karma wasn't a transaction. It was a tide, and it was finally coming back in, not to wash away my children's castles of sand, but to drown me in the deep, dark water of my own sins. I had to make a choice. I could fight. I could unleash every lawyer, every dirty trick, every ounce of influence I had against Charles Risher. It would be a war of attrition. I might even win, in a legal sense, but I would lose. The story would get out. The stain would never wash away. Or I could surrender. I could sign over half of everything I owned to the ghost of a man he'd wronged. I could let a stranger take the seat at the head of my table. It was a fate worse than death. There was a third option. It flickered in the back of my mind, dark and desperate. I could run. I could disappear, like Thomas Risher had. I could take what was left and vanish, leaving the whole rotten mess behind for the vultures to fight over. But that wasn't me. I was Arthur Kane. I built. I didn't run. As I sat there in the dark, a memory surfaced, not of Thomas Risher, not of the betrayal, but of a day years later. My wife, Eleanor, was still alive. Michael was maybe 10 years old, had built a lopsided birdhouse in shop class. He was so proud of it. He showed it to me, his eyes shining with the need for my approval. And what did I do? I pointed out the crooked nail, the misaligned roof. I told him it wouldn't withstand the weather. I told him to build it again, and to build it right. The light in his eyes didn't just dim, it went out. He never built anything for me again. I had spent a lifetime building everything right. The straightest nails, the strongest walls. And for what? To sit alone in the dark, waiting for the entire structure to collapse on top of me. The revelation wasn't sudden. It was a slow, dawning horror. My revenge against my children, it wasn't justice. It was just the same old story, repeating itself. I was still the man critiquing the lopsided birdhouse. I was still trying to force them to build it my way. And when they couldn't, I'd rather burn it down than see them be proud of something imperfect. I had become the very thing I'd hated in that moment. A man who valued the product over the person, the empire over the family. I didn't sleep that night. I wandered the empty halls of my castle, running my hands over the cold, perfect stone. I saw the portraits of my stern-faced ancestors. I saw the awards, the accolades. It was all a museum to a life that had been lived for all the wrong reasons. When the sun finally rose, pale and weak through the rain-streaked windows, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about balance. It was about atonement. I called Benjamin Croft. He arrived within the hour, looking like he hadn't slept either. Ben, I said, not offering him a seat, I need you to do 2 things for me, and you are to speak of them to no one, ever, anything. Arthur, he said, his loyalty, though strained, still there. First, you will contact Charles Risher. You will tell him I agree to his terms, unconditionally. Draw up the papers. He gets his 51%. He gets his name on the door. He gets it all. Ben's jaw dropped. Arthur, the company, your life's work, was built on a lie, I said quietly. It's time to pay the debt. Make it happen. He nodded, too stunned to argue. And then the second thing. I took a deep breath. This was harder. This was the true end of my reign. Gather the family. All of them, here, tonight. Tell them it's urgent. What are you going to do? He asked, fear in his eyes. The only thing I have left to do, I said. I'm going to tell them the truth. The family arrived that evening like a gathering storm. They filed into my study, their faces a mixture of suspicion, anger, and naked greed. Michael, still seething from his ruin. Sarah, brittle and cold. David, a shadow of a man, avoiding my eyes. Their spouses, the hangers-on, all waiting to see what the old man would do next. They didn't sit. They stood, a semicircle of accusation facing my desk. What's this about, Dad? Michael asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Have you found a new way to profit from our misery? One didn't rise to the bait. I looked at them, really looked at them, not as obstacles or disappointments, but as my children. Flawed, greedy, selfish but mine, and I saw myself in them. I saw my own ambition in Michael, my own ruthlessness in Sarah, my own capacity for betrayal in David. I had made them in my image, and then had punished them for it. I asked you here, I began, my voice slow but clear, to tell you that you were right. They exchanged confused glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. About what? Sarah asked, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. About everything, I said. The money. The inheritance. You were right to want it. You were right to see me as an obstacle. Because I have spent my entire life hoarding this thing I built. I valued it more than I valued you. I was so disappointed that you weren't like me, that I never stopped to think that being like me was the worst possible thing you could be. The room was silent. They were listening now, bewildered. My revenge against you, I continued, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. My karmic investment, it was the act of a cruel and small man. I am sorry. Michael snorted. Sorry. You bankrupt us. Humiliate us. And you think an apology fixes it? No, I said, shaking my head. It doesn't. An apology doesn't fix anything. But this might. I picked up a thick set of documents from my desk. These are new wills, new trusts. The majority of the company, is no longer mine to give. That debt has been called in by a previous obligation. I couldn't bring myself to say Risha's name. Not yet. But what is left? The liquid assets, the properties, the art, everything that isn't entailed in the corporate structure. I have divided it equally among you, among your children. It is yours. Today, not when I die. Today. I dropped the documents on the desk. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. They stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. The greed in their eyes was immediate, bright and flashing, but it was mixed with something else now, utter, total confusion. Why? Sarah whispered, her hand half reaching for the documents. Why would you do this now? Because I finally understood, I said, feeling more tired than I had ever felt in my life. I was trying to teach you a lesson about value, but the lesson was for me. The value isn't in the money. It's in the hands you pass it to. I was so afraid you would waste it, that you would prove yourselves unworthy, that I never gave you the chance to be worthy. I only gave you reasons to resent me. I looked at David. The digging into my past stops. Now. Forever. That particular truth dies with me. Is that understood? He nodded, vigorously, his eyes wide. I looked at them all. The money is yours. Do with it what you will. Build something new. Burn it. I don't care. It's yours. My final lesson is that there are no more lessons. You are free of me. I turned my back on them. A dismissal. I heard them scramble for the documents, heard the muffled whispers, the rustle of pages. I didn't turn around. I heard them leave, one by one, without a word. The door clicked shut. I was alone again. But the silence was different this time. It wasn't the silence of victory or the silence of dread. It was the silence of an empty stage after the play has ended. The performance was over. The actor could finally rest. I don't know what they'll do with their freedom. I don't know if they'll squander it or build something beautiful. It's not my business anymore. The karmic investment is closed. The books are balanced. The debt is paid. My name is Arthur Kane. I built a castle, and I spent a lifetime living in it alone. And now, as the light finally fades, I have only one regret. I wish I had told my son that I loved his lopsided birdhouse.